Hello and welcome to Light Warrior Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Kan, author of the number one bestselling book, Sensitivity is Your Superpower: How to Harness Your Gifts, Fulfill Your Purpose, and Create a Life of Joy. And before I introduce our guest today, I want to tell you a little story. My father was in surgery for a fracture of his femur, his leg bone. And when he stepped into, well, rolled into the OR suite, he was horrified. On the wall, he saw saws, hammers, all sorts of equipment, orthopedic equipment he was not prepared to see. And I could just, being so empathetic, I could just feel his fear and trepidation. We don't want patients to have to go through that. Perhaps patients, being told you have 3 weeks to live, right? The shock of that. My dad was told in another instance he had 4 months to live. And I was like, well, if you want to believe that, And so I tend to, as a former medical doctor, get really frustrated sometimes with what patients have to go through. And our beautiful guest today, Stephanie MoDavis, is a kind of like, she really knows what it feels like to be on that side. She actually has gone through transplant surgery. Can't say that's happened to me yet. And so she's been really seeing, feeling, experiencing the patient journey personally. And so she has come a long way from that place to really become kind of an inner transformation mentor. So she's at the dual role of practitioner and experiencer. She works between the worlds of Eastern medicine, Western medicine. We were talking a little bit about that bridge between conventional medicine and other healthcare or holistic care. And I think that she has some really neat, not just ideas, but implementation that she is doing right now so that we can somehow cultivate a sacred, a sacred relationship, a sacred union between patient and provider. And what I really love about it is that it is, we talk about patient-centered medicine, but this is way beyond that. It really is the patient finding their voice, and that is the change that we need. It's not going to be me telling my colleagues stop saying that to people. That's so mean, right? It's going to be the patient that does that. So Stephanie, we are so happy to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me and for everything you're doing for our world to improve this very pressing issue.
It is absolutely pressing. And in fact, literally in the last week, I had two clients that I do like medicine work with be told by their Western medical providers that they either could die, or they need chemo, they, all this kind of thing, and the shock and the terror,
Mhm.
that they feel. I mean, it's visceral, and I feel kind of sad and also angry sometimes at my
Mhm.
colleagues for saying things so nonchalantly that way. I wasn't there, of course. So give us your perspective as the experiencer of the Western medical model. What happened? Why'd you need transplants? Like all that kind of stuff.
Okay, well, let me take you back just for a brief moment. I was fortunate enough to, as a young adult, late teenager, get into yoga. That was my saving grace. I had no idea what the actual practice of yoga and the education of the actual philosophy of yoga would be giving me in the next 10 years of my life. So, fortunately, I was practicing meditation, yoga, aspects of self awareness, aspects of Eastern medicine, which are very different than the Western medical model. So, I had this already ingrained idea of what does it look like to be in balance? How do I slow down when I see my life spinning out of control? How do I breathe when I'm under stress? What are my actual stress responses and how do I work to provide that balance? Thank the Lord above that I had that experience because lo and behold, as a healthy young lady, I was about 19 turning 20, all of a sudden out of the blue, I had these mysterious medical issues that started to present. Like any young, healthy girl, I was very confused by this, and I started to get seen by multiple doctors where nobody was able to give me a clear diagnosis. It was also similar to that medically unexplained that's very popular and it's starting to increase. We don't know what's wrong with you, but the patient feels as though there's something very deeply wrong happening. It took me about a year to get a final diagnosis. I was about 20, going on 21. I was getting sicker and sicker with symptoms of arthritis, inflammation, fatigue, mental confusion. Just I knew something was not right within me, but nobody knew what was going on. And it took a very severe hospitalization where I then developed a butterfly rash on my face for them to finally say, you have systemic lupus erythematosus, which is an autoimmune disease. I was shocked because I was doing perceivably everything right in my life. I'm a recovering perfectionist, right? I grew up in that household where I was the parentified child. So I thought I'm doing everything right. I have to be perfect in order to be loved, seen, and valued. So I'm going to do everything right. And it turned out that I actually was in balance in that emotional and mental component of myself. And that stress was causing my immune system to react. So the diagnosis of lupus was really shocking to me. And my first inclination was I'm going to heal myself naturally. And I thought fully in my heart that I was going to be able to do that. And at that tender young age, I didn't have a, a, a huge amount of experience behind me yet to really understand what that looked like. I had a lot of learning to do. So I just did what I thought I could do, which was how do I change my diet? What can I do to make myself heal? And what I was doing wasn't actually helping me in the long run. And I see looking back the process that I had to go through to get me where I am today, to really humble myself. I didn't have the knowledge I truly needed and the confidence within my heart and soul to do that which I had hoped to do back then. I remember seeing my first rheumatologist, and I said, look, I'm very sick. I'm aware. He started prescribing me steroids for the inflammation, all of the basic stuff. And I said, I am letting you know that I am very much involved in my own healing process. I said, I do yoga, I do meditation. And he said, oh, just you better stop that all right now because none of that's going to help you. And I was crushed because that was who I identified with. I identified as this woman who had autonomy over my own life and my own health process. And for him to tell me so blatantly that that's not going to help you. In fact, don't even bother doing any of that anymore. Whatever you're doing completely crushed my spirit. And I continued with him for about a year, which I eventually had to fire him. But what happened was I was deteriorating physically and I was already fatigued immensely. And I listened to him. And that was one of the biggest mistakes that I could have ever made along my healing journey, where I stopped practicing yoga as much. I stopped believing in myself as much because I thought that I had failed. So I actually let those words profoundly affect me. And then I actually started to buy in to his philosophy. And I've learned over time that that can happen so easily that you go in, you're not feeling right, you're imbalanced. And even if you have a solid core identity of healing and health and you have your own ways of doing things, if somebody that has an authority in a perceived position and you go in and your role in the healthcare system is you are the victim and the healthcare provider is hopefully going to be a savior. And if you buy into that model, it just immediately pigeonholes you into a role where you no longer have the authority over your life and your healing process. And I fell victim to that imbalance without fully understanding until later how much that would affect me negatively by releasing my sovereignty and saying, okay, if I'm to live, because he was using the scary words. You're not going to live if you do yoga. You're not going to live if you do that. Like, this isn't going to keep you alive. This is very serious. You need to take all the medication and you need to listen to everything that I'm telling you to do. And I wanted to rebel against that. I was at first, and he was sensing that. But then the fear took over. Karen, I thought, well, I don't want to die. So maybe I better just listen to everything that he's telling me to do. And I had to live that experience for the next 10 years of my life until I really reclaimed myself and healed my medical trauma from being within the system. I left myself behind. I took all the medication and I still got worse. So by the age of 24, I found myself in complete kidney failure. Even though I listened to everything the doctors were telling me to do, I still progressed to my near death, right? So it didn't really help. I can't say whether or not if I would have done it differently, how things would have looked. I didn't do it differently. But me abandoning myself and doing everything the doctor said didn't help me. Didn't help me. Just
Mm,
led me down that road of getting sicker, massive side effects from all the steroids and all of the experimental medications. Nothing helped. So at 24, I got the sad news after a biopsy that I didn't want, that I was going into organ failure. And that's something at 24 was confusing. I tried to do it myself. I listened to everything that the doctors said. Nothing was working. I never anticipated a life where I was going to either need a kidney transplant or potentially die to live. So that began 5 years of me embracing the fact that I needed dialysis. I needed to get surgeries to have accesses. I needed to sit in a room with 40 to 50 other people in kidney failure every other day of the week to get my blood filtered for 4 hours. I never was prepared for this experience that I was about to have. It was incredibly humbling. It was incredibly depressing and dark. But thankfully, I remembered when it got the darkest for me where I came from. I started to remember where I came from. And I could feel the depression, the anxiety, the uncertainty. And something within me said, remember who you are. Start meditating, start breathing. When they stick you with the needle, you know how to calm yourself down. You don't have to take all the medication they're telling you that every normal dialysis patient takes because you're stressed and anxious. You know how to regulate your nervous system. So slowly and surely, I started to re-embrace my old self through that process. And that was an incredible saving grace. But I also was slightly going against, I started to realize I had to go against what I was told within the system and often what the doctors would tell me. I was starting to create that confidence back in myself to return to what the body can do naturally. So fortunately, 5 years into dialysis, some of my darkest days. At 29, I received my first kidney transplant and an incompatible kidney swap at Johns Hopkins in Maryland. So I was very fortunate. There are people who live on dialysis. I was eligible for a transplant, thank goodness. And I had a living donor where we did a swap with other people, so I would have a direct match. That was 10 years of me being really intimately intertwined within what I call the disempowerment model of Western healthcare. And although I had some really good technicians and I had a couple of surgeons who stepped in and did some profound surgery on me, I can honestly say from my heart, after being in this now for close to 25 to 30 years, is that the model needs a complete renovation. And if we don't do it soon, we're going to continue to lose people day after day because we're not letting the patient voice be heard. We're not letting people empower themselves to transform. And we're not using people's illness experience as a opportunity for spiritual transformation. We're telling them that it's bad and we have to go to war, which disempowers patients, makes them depressed. They're totally afraid. And all of this just traps people in a continuous victim savior model where the providers maybe get more ego to survive. They loosh their energy off of various means to keep going and survive and to think they're great and they're saving people. And the patients also continue in a disempowered state and nobody heals in a Cartman triangle relationship of savior, perpetrator, victim. Nobody heals in that dynamic.
right. Oh my goodness. Yes. Oh, I really, really, it's extremely humbling, coming from the medical background where my desire was to make a difference in people's lives. And I was one of those empathetic doctors that definitely was not making good money for the hospital, apparently, because I couldn't see 20 to 60 patients an hour. Nope. Um, yeah, and there just doesn't seem to be a lot of support for medical doctors in medical school. We tried. We had like support groups and things like that, but at the end of the day, that it seems like there's like this big engine, and here you and I are saying we need to like redirect this engine or rebuild it. So it seems like a really tough task. So how are you reperceiving this passion of yours into something that's possible?
Well, thank you for asking, and you're absolutely right. We're fighting a big machine, a big aggregore of this systemic energy, and we all know now that we're seeing the limitations of the systems are starting to break down. There are cracks forming within the system, whether it be healthcare or banking or whatever system it is the cracks are being revealed, which is causing a lot of people to double down in the dysfunction of it. And we're seeing a lot of that. But my personal contribution at some point when I recovered and I really realized what was going on was to create an initiative called Awakening Healthcare. And my goal was to basically share that which I experienced throughout my journey at several prestigious institutions was that we had a disempowerment model. We had to address illness slightly different than the way we were doing it. And I wanted to try to balance the scales to fill that actual patient participation model that systems claim that they have, which they really don't. I really wanted to try to validate that which was coming out of the healthcare models, which was we're innovative, we're pioneering, we're patient centered first. All of that I wasn't really actually, there were good words, good languaging, but I wasn't really seeing this being implemented. So my personal vision started out simple. And what it was that I was going to create a program for organ transplant teams at different hospital institutions where we had peers, trained, empowered peers, not just any peer, an empowerment peer that would meet the patient in the hospital when they did their first evaluation, which if and nobody knows anything about a transplant evaluation, your first visit or two are usually 8 hours long where you see all members of the team and you start to get an understanding of what your process is going to be like. You see a social worker, a financial counselor, your surgeon, the nurse coordinators. And I thought, why not an empowered patient who's been through this so it can give them hope to see what's possible and also help to provide them with some emotional support, which is desperately needed
Oh
amongst the healthcare team on both sides, right? Most transplant patients tend to be on, Medicare, which doesn't provide them mental health services. So there's just such a gap. So I thought the least we can do, the lowest hanging fruit, as I see
yeah.
leaves dropping behind you, the
Yeah.
lowest hanging fruit was let's just get a trained peer mentor who's lived the experience to come in at that initial consultation evaluation and come into the room and say, hi, I'm Stephanie MoDavis. I am not a doctor, but I've been through this and I'm here for you. And if you have
Mm.
any questions, I would be more than happy to connect to you because there's a lot of uncertainties. That's the only thing I wanted to do, Karen. And
That sounds amazing. Amazing. Oh my
it
gosh,
turned
that would
out
make such a difference.
I knew that it would because I needed it. And everybody that I had researched and talked to following was like, oh my gosh, if I would have had that then, my journey would have been different. So I realized this can save the patient needless suffering because they don't have what they need right from the jump. So my Awakening Healthcare initiative was to propose this to institutions. And unbelievably and believably, I went through a 7-year process of very deep challenges by trying to implement this program. Because what I realized is that there is a lot of bureaucracy within a hospital system, there's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of laws about bringing people into a healthcare team that aren't actual hospital employees. I had
Oh,
people from institutions tell me, well, what if the peer mentor falls? What then? Then we're liable for if they fall. I mean,
oh
I heard
boy.
anything and everything to block patients from coming into the
It's like
hospital
they didn't
system.
want it on some level,
I I
consciously or subconsciously.
I think that it had a lot to do with the people that I was talking to. And trust me, I reached out to so many institutions, including the ones that I was transplanted at. And many people know that I'm a source of inspiration for patients. They understand who I am.
Right.
But they would just come up with all of these excuses. And what I realized was that in order to have something that's actually patient centered and really truly there to provide service for the patient only, I started to realize that the entire flow of the transplant team would have to change. Like I was first told that, well, you have to be a volunteer. And then I at the hospital. So I started to go through volunteer processes and train patients for that. And then they would say, well, we don't really have a structure for something you want to do. So it was like I was hitting these boundaries at every step of the way. And what I realized is that if we want to implement true patient centered change within the institution, the entire system has to shift. It wasn't just as light and airy as let's just get a patient in there to sit and meet the new patient. If anything was
Right.
to be structured appropriately, everybody was going to have to shift. And
Wow.
because the majority of the system is burnout, overworked, undervalued, underseen, it's like I was trying to, squeeze juice out of a rock to
Mm,
say, this is what patients need. And so many providers would say to me, I mean, I've met with entire teams and, of transplant and the cardiac thoracic chair with, the chair, everybody in the department. Oh my gosh, we need this. We need this. We need this.
yeah,
We
yeah,
need this.
yeah.
How do I do this? But then when it actually came to organizing the people to structure something together that was going to be sustainable, to get them to go out of their way a tiny bit to help structure this program, it just was turtles all the way down every time. It just would never happen. And I started to realize one thing. This was my pivotal realization, Karen, was that not only did we have a disempowerment model for our patients in terms of true transformation, like if you buy into what the hospital system is selling you, if you buy the Kool-Aid and you play the victim and then like then it's a hunky-dory love relationship. But if you're looking at your illness and your experience differently and you want to have sovereignty and you want to be a participant with your providers to really have your best experience, then you start going against what they feel that they're best at, because that's the story. That's their story that
Right.
they live in and that they're involved in. So when you start to challenge the story, guess what? Then it challenges the egos of those running that story. And they claim that we're number one at this and we're number
Yep.
one at that. What I realized through the years of me going to different institutions and moving to different states to try to simply start a peer mentor program within the hospital for the patients, not outside of it. That was another scapegoat, was that a lot of teams would say, oh, well, doesn't that certain nonprofit do that? And that certain nonprofit has mentors and they can get help over here at that nonprofit. And I said, they need help right when they're seen and the fear starts to overwhelm them. I want to be part of the team for real. And I want to
Yep.
be the person to say, hey, I got your back. That's it. I
Yep.
got your
Yep.
back. What I realized is that not only are patients in a disempowerment model, but the entirety of this system actually disempowers providers as well. They got the white coat syndrome, right? They can act strong and they can use their ego to leverage certain aspects of their position. But at the end of the day, I saw many providers, I started to see right through them. And I said, this is a cover. Your ego is a cover for your own weakness and your own inability to challenge the system, because you're telling me that this is the right thing to do, but then you're telling me I don't know how to do it. I'm nobody.
Ouch.
I'm a nobody. I don't have a voice. I don't know how to go to make this happen. That's the story that I heard from some of
Oh
the top
man.
level providers within the system would say, this is amazing, but I don't know how to help you do this. No one's going to listen to me. And
Jeez,
I would say, you're the chair of the department.
yeah,
What do you mean nobody's going to listen to you?
yeah, but that's crazy. That's just
It's,
well, it's sort of like, they say that people get comfortable,
yeah, sure.
even comfortable with discomfort, even if they know there's a problem, but they get kind of comfortable with it. And as long as nobody rocks the boat and nobody kind of points to the emperor has no clothes,
Yes.
yeah, they're like, I'm gonna stay in this comfy place. But it's and we saw this over, the 2020 and all that kind of stuff where people that did go out of their comfort zones, healthcare providers, medical doctors that said, hey, this isn't adding up. And I don't think this is right for the patient. And we're going to make a sovereign decision, or allow the patient their sovereign decision. And they got, censored, lambasted, death threats, lost jobs, lost licenses all over the place. And it was like, whoa. Right. And still, I mean, I was just thrilled to like one of my parents' doctors said, no, I don't think this is right for you. I'm like, oh my God, thank God. Right. Like,
Yeah.
because whatever
Yeah.
the doctor say is what I'm a medical doctor, right? And like 5-time best-selling author, it doesn't matter to my parents. Their doctor is the one that is right.
Yes, yes. And unfortunately, again, we've been conditioned in such a way culturally to follow authority. And what has
Yeah.
happened and what has become very blatantly clear is
Mm,
that absolute power can corrupt. And we haven't been holding people accountable. Our leaders, there's been a lot of things that have gone on that we haven't held people responsible for. There's been a lot of mistakes that have been covered up. There's a lot of things that are swept under the rug. There's a lot of things that go on that are really it's just that energy of fracturing and splitting and separating is what keeps systems profitable. So what heals? Unity,
mm, mhm,
collaboration, equality. This is what
yeah.
heals. So they split the patient and the provider. That model, again, that separation model, victim savior, persecutor model, that's a profitable model.
Ugh. It
Somebody's,
almost pains me when you
usually,
say that.
yeah, somebody's usually living in a false empowered state, which is that's why the ego is so great at that. Is like,
Okay.
I will make you, I'll give you all the things and the material resources to make you feel important and special. And you look, you got your white coat, you got your letters after your name. Well, now we're realizing that none of that matters. I know some of the most brilliant double PhDs who are the most fearful people I've ever met with no emotional intelligence.
Wow.
So this is the reality now, is that in order to be authentic and to try to initiate a change, the environment is calling for leaders who embody intelligence and knowledge, but can couple that with empowerment, love, and unity. They don't need to be elevated. They don't need to have an elevated status. So when you elevate yourself, the energy works that it automatically you're disempowering someone else. And quick story. I used to
Mm.
work with a physician, and as a peer mentor coach, as this was all formulating, I had a couple providers say, hey, I think, would you mind sitting in on a visit with one of my patients who I think could benefit from hearing you? And then
Wow.
they would ask their patients, hey, we have this peer mentor, she's also been through a transplant, would you be willing to talk to her while in our visit? Okay.
Oh,
So that was very cool, but something very interesting happened. Every time I did that, it'd be the patient, the provider, and me as the peer mentor who has the
right.
lived experience.
Right.
Every single time this would happen, they would sit there and talk to the provider. And I've been the patient. I'm the patient model, right?
No,
And
I don't even want to hear this part.
they would come in and try to be a good patient and, well, I'm doing this and I'm doing this, and you could very serious like clearly see the energy dynamics of the relationship playing out.
Mhm.
Okay. And
Like,
then,
give me some approval. I'm doing all the right things, so hopefully you'll give me the
yeah,
good
and
news.
looking to you, what else can I do, like
Yeah.
really, you could just see. the
Mm.
roles playing out very clearly, okay?
Okay.
Very clearly. And then when the provider would hand it over to me and they would say, "Okay, here's Stephanie. She's a life coach and she's been through what you've been through and, you know, go ahead and I'm going to watch you guys talk a little bit." So they would stay there with me and watch, right? Immediately, usually the eye contact, the patient would start to cry. It was like their guard was completely let down. And they were like, they knew they couldn't talk to somebody who's been through it without being 100% real.
Wow.
Right. So tears would happen. And I would say, I see you. I know where you're at. I know how hard this is. And just me seeing them from an emotional, spiritual, experiential level where I'm not there to save them, I'm just there to be with them.
Mm.
They would emotionally open up immediately and then they would start talking. And every single time this happened to me, Karen, the provider would say to me, "That was so amazing. They told you things in 15 minutes that they haven't told me in 1 year." And I would say, "Because I don't have on a white coat. I'm just like them, holding space for them." So you can
Yeah.
see how we've had such a rise in life coaching or physician guides. People are realizing what heals and makes progress is when you meet somebody as a guide. You're walking with them. It's very
Mm.
equal. You have to drop your ego, even if you know
Woo.
and have the knowledge, right? We can respect doctors for their knowledge, right? But the doctor has to respect the patient for their knowledge. And nowadays, everybody has access to one of the most powerful educational resources out there, which is AI. And trust me, if you meet somebody like me, I always say I'm usually a provider's worst nightmare unless they don't have an ego.
Mm.
This is what it is. Because I have a long experience. I know myself, I know others, and I can see right through
Right.
you. So
Right, and
usually
you stay sovereign in who you are as opposed to being swayed by, their ego and what they think and
they
needing
can't.
approval,
Right.
right?
Yeah. There's no fooling me. And often I can call stuff out from them. I don't utilize that tactic because uh, you know, I understand
Not
that
popular.
yeah, it's not really helpful,
Right.
but that's where we're going is that the generations of people like your parents, like my parents, who think the doctor's God is dying.
Mm.
We're in a new space and time now. So once those generations aren't here no longer, the doctor's going to have to meet many of me's. And are
Yeah.
they ready for that? Are
Well,
they ready to be like, wow, this patient, like, not only does she, is she intelligent about her experience, but maybe I could learn a thing or two from what she's telling me. Are we ready for that? That's the
oh
call.
boy.
That's where we're going. If we want healthcare to survive as it is and not just keep fracturing and splitting, and now we have doctors against doctors. That's how
Yes.
systems and capitalization, or capitalizing and getting money, that's how it thrives. It thrives
Mm.
off of division.
Oh
Right. I
man.
know doctors that are against other doctors now, patients against other patients. It's like it's coming closer to home. It's
Oh
not just
boy.
patient provider or the left and the right. They're creating all these micro fractures all over the place. And at the end of the day, the people running the show are delighted because pain sells, suffering sells, illness sells.
Oh my goodness. Well, I know for like my medical doctor colleagues and friends are doing the best they can.
Sure.
Right? And I live in a small town where everyone's an athlete, so at least they're modeling a healthy lifestyle. At least, because in the big city, guess what? The doctor that my dad went to as a cardiologist, he was actually trying to be more holistic. He died. His replacement cardiologist is about 150 pounds overweight, and he's telling me, well, I know that Dr. So and so is really into coenzyme Q10, but I don't see that there's any evidence, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, my dad was there and he would be so pissed if I said it, but I wanted to say, well, my current understanding is those 13 medications that my dad is on, that there is no evidence that that is actually safe. Can you find me a paper on that? right? And it would totally embarrass him, and my dad would just hate me forever, so I didn't do that. But
Yeah.
it's they're I think their heart mostly is in the right place,
Yes.
but they're not self-caring, right? They're
Yeah.
not even sovereign themselves. How can we expect them to be there for the patient?
If we could just let me just propose something out there that's like a dream vision of mine is that
Okay.
if you are a highly educated doctor in any field, find a local person who is into natural health, whether it be nutritional, even spiritual, somebody who really honors the mind body connection, and go get yourself really uncomfortable with what they have to say. Do it. Don't drop your ego, because what's happening is when I speak to doctors, and this situation that you're referring to is like, because of it, I've popped my own personal bubbles and I've explored different aspects of health, which for me include the mind body connection. That's absolutely needs to be validated. That's or it's archaic that we haven't really fully come to that realization in Western healthcare yet.
Backwards, really.
Right. But then emotional well-being, nutritional well-being, psychological well-being, people now online, generations younger than us are working through their shadow work, healing their generational trauma, aligning their life. They go to a regular Western doc now with their education. It looks like the doctor's 10 years behind and really incompetent in everything about what the younger generations are coming to realize, which is my
Mm.
emotions matter, my spiritual well-being matters, my
My ancestral
my
trauma
nutrition.
matters.
Exactly. And these are things that, most older generations don't value, haven't looked at. And in fact, what we don't want is this schism where the providers and the health authorities are actually diminishing someone else's healing journey.
Mm.
Because that's the way healing and healthcare is going, is that we're realizing we're a whole being. So if you're not practicing from a whole being space yet, you need to my suggestion always is whatever triggers you most from a doctor or patient point of view, then go explore that bubble for as long as you can until it doesn't trigger you anymore, and understand why there's a call for it. Embrace that there's a call or a movement for that shift. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are. If you're treating people from a health standpoint, you got to understand why somebody feels that healing their generational trauma is affecting their migraines. You have to accept that. You can't say, "Oh, that's not true. I don't believe in that." You're harming. You're then not. It's the Hippocratic Oath has failed you. Then
Wow.
we
You
have to
actually feel it's
understand people.
harmful then for them to dismiss the patient's belief in that way.
I I absolutely do. I think that there is a fine line because now we have gotten very extreme in some other ways with what we accept and what we feel is normal. So it
True.
is a very fine line now because we've made everything. There's a movement that
Mhm.
we should accept anybody for anything, which means even if you show up in the doctor's office and you say, "I'm a cat and I need a litter box," we have to the doctors are at this place now where they have to say, okay. And they
Oh
do, a
boy.
lot of them have to agree with these narratives. And you see this a lot around, this is very controversial, but you see this with, trans ideology and gender transitioning, where actual medical doctors are saying things that they know is not true. And they're getting trained to actually have this speak in communications to validate people. So we're in a little bit of a messy territory.
Oh. Mhm.
I think that what we need right now is patient and provider empowerment. And that means to search for the truth and seek the truth out. And if you don't know it, keep seeking until you find it, because you will find it. And if there's a doctor, and sadly for doctors right now, is that even if they wanted to be courageous, and they live within the system, they cannot. And
Mm.
this is now where we've gotten to a place, sadly, with doctors. I think we've swept a lot of things under the rug for too long. And now
Yeah.
doctors are really feeling it. And either they're doubling down and
Entrenched.
entrenched in their ego and still just doing the same things they do, or sadly, a lot of them become addicts and they check out to try to navigate their life, or whatever, materialism, whatever it may be. But there are a lot of doctors who want to speak truth and say things, and a lot of them do and are getting canceled. And kudos to those doctors who have chose the truth and their heart and have stood up against what they believe is betrayal for them and their patients. And I think we are starting to see more doctors coming together and making progress, and that's positive. But I think what's being asked of all of us, whether you're a patient or a provider, is to understand your triggers and understand where you feel dysregulated by something. Whether, even if you're a patient and you're sick, if you have division in your life and hate and anger and fear, that doesn't equate to a healing process. Same with a provider. If you feel division, if you can't stand your patient that comes in and talks about yoga, then you probably should go to yoga for at least 6 weeks until you can at least develop the understanding as to why your patient feels it's valuable. We got to
Wow.
eliminate
Boy.
the kind of the proxy parent thing that goes on within the healthcare system of,
Ugh.
I don't think my patient's capable, so I got to play mommy and daddy here. That's a disempowerment model. And that's what I think is dying.
Well, I've done it. I'm going to be honest. I've done it. I think for me and many medical doctors, it's you talked about perfectionism, and Brian Goldman, MD, is from Ottawa, and he had a beautiful TED talk around it. He said like, Babe Ruth and all these really famous baseball players, if their score, like how many home runs they get or whatever, is like 75%. For that's like woo, they are going strong. But if a doctor has a 75% success rate, what if you were a surgeon? You only had 75% success rate. You're a complete failure. You cannot make a mistake. You have to be 100%. That kind of pressure is intense. And
Yeah.
so I totally understand the masks, the I'm good, I'm going to do what the system says because at least they can protect me possibly, but what you're saying is not for long.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for doctors. I love, the doctors, certain doctors I've had, and, I really have a bleeding heart for what they have to deal with. And the reality is that I believe you. I think that 99.9% of doctors are very well intended and it's their calling. I fully believe that. But I think that we need to, and as you mentioned early, we have to start early with doctors. I think different medical school education and some the way that we're structuring things could really be helpful for some providers. I've had many doctors say very bluntly to me that they love new, fresh med students because they're so excited, they're so eager, they're so just really gung ho about their career ahead of them. And then by the time they graduate med school, this one pioneering doctor said to me, it's like they lost their soul, all of them. So, and then
Oh,
it just keeps getting kind of crushed out of them to embrace this egoic model, because if they don't have that and they do fail or something happens where, again, it could be very soul crushing. I do believe,
mm,
though, if providers were taught self-awareness, the purpose of failure, if they really knew themselves prior to going out attempting to treat somebody else. When you think of the East, or you think of a shaman, or you think of somebody who's a healer, you can only start to work with someone else until, when you've done your own work, you've healed yourself. A lot of mystics, a lot of great sages, a lot of people in history, a lot of biblical people, they have had to go on their own journey of
right.
complete breakdown, physically, mentally, spiritually, like the butterfly, in order for them to trust themselves in a very authentic way to come back and serve another. And that, sadly, is what we're missing. We're replacing that with education. And I do know some doctors who have been educated really well, and then they have a successful career, and then they go through an actual patient experience that's very traumatic, whether it be cancer or needing their own organ transplant. And then this changes the game completely.
Yes,
So
yes.
there's a guy that I love. His name is Daniel Schmachtenberger. He's like an evolutionary. And he always says, if we're ever going to survive, Anybody in a place of leadership needs some sort of ritualized suffering. Now that sounds horrible. Why would we want to make anybody suffer? But the reality is, if you're street smart and you're knowledge smart, you're incredibly powerful, right? If you're
Yeah,
one or the other, you're missing something.
yeah,
Hence why I thought, back to the beginning, the easiest part of me to integrate this care and compassion and ability to transform from the patient, the peer to peer point of view, I thought, well, here is a good relationship where the provider can stay focused on the things that they excel at. A lot of providers that I know are not good with empathy. They don't have emotional intelligence. They have never done deep work on themselves to really relate in that depth, that deep way with a patient. So then that's okay. Just do what you're good at. Go over the labs, tell them, like, do what you're good at. If you're not good at everything, don't try to be good at everything. Right. So that's where I was thinking the peer is a helpful part of this story, because then the surgeon can, he's the surgeon, he's doing his thing, he's focused, the GP's focused on their part, their focused person is can specialize in their part, and then here is the patient that can help guide them through the emotional aspects of the journey. Like, then we can do this as a team. And I think that's where we're going, is that this feminine energy movement of care and empathy, which the medical model is not that model.
right.
We may have little cells within the model of GPs barely breathing, barely staying above water, saying, well, I'm the empathetic one, and I have a little echo chamber of other providers who are really unhappy, and we try to figure out how we can care together. That's not the way to do it, because they won't survive in that echo chamber. Is we need to really actually have an empowerment model where we understand really what's needed and everybody stays really good at doing their part. And if we're missing a part, then we have to say, look, I'm a caring, empathetic GP, but I only got 15 minutes with you. Okay. And I'm going to do it as best as I can in that 15 minutes, but I know you need more than me. So I'm going to hook you up with a patient that we have here on file who can help to guide you through your darkest moments if you have some emotional turmoil as well. Right. And then also, immediately we got to introduce some sort of empowerment and another story for a patient, because the lower the patient goes and the more we make them the victim, the more needy they get, the more afraid they get, the more they're going to be calling you left and right and being lost. So I would love to see some sort of program initiative where, obviously, if it's somebody who may be late in their life, they might not be going through a profound transformation. They may, but I think it's always an opportunity to, if somebody gets diagnosed with something right from the start, to say, look, this is not what we all wanted, but you're here. But let's immediately start to think about ways we can look at this and ways we can heal other aspects of our life while we're going through this. So that's why I always encourage inner transformation and self reflection while somebody's physically going through something really challenging. If you don't give them a way to empower some part of them, then they're just going to fall deep into that depression and be on the medications for the depression. And then you're just working a downward
Mm.
spiral.
Oh my goodness, my goodness. So I just feel your passion, for this project, for our future.
I don't know that it's going to happen, Karen, but it's a vision. It's a vision.
Love it. How do people contact you or perhaps work with you? Can you share a little bit about your websites, etc.?
Sure. Yeah. So my website is just my name, stephaniemoddavis.com. My email is Stephanie MoDavis. It's all on there as well. I do have a Twitter account and I have a YouTube channel. I don't do all of social media, but I'm happy to talk to anybody that's looking to really find the courage to step into their fullness to help revolutionize our story here.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. Well, we
You're
definitely
welcome.
need people like you, who are so passionate about that, that have had that experience. And I think there's so separate cells of medical doctors like myself who've gone through their own personal journey and so-called pain and, formerly suffering, that we've come to the other side, but we're all little individual cells, around
Yeah.
doing our own thing. So I think it's
Yes.
amazing to have somebody like you who's like, hey, let's do this in an organized way. It's not my forte, but I'm happy to speak, but not like my forte to organize. It's sort of like herding cats. Anyway, um, I think it's so, so wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie, so much for your work and your passion and the love that you give to and giving the patients a real voice. You're
Yeah.
a huge blessing on the world. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for what you do, Karen.
My pleasure. And thanks everyone for listening in. Remember to connect with me in the light medicine community. And if you liked this amazing, I loved it, interview, go ahead and give it a like, share it to everyone who you think needs to hear it. And remember to subscribe to my channel. Until next time, big love, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie.